We encourage you to hit the subscribe button right now so you can listen to more podcasts of Operation Truth.
Send us an email, ask your questions, and very possibly we'll address your question on the air.
Operation Truth, the show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
I'm Tom Fuentes, co-host of the Operation Truth podcast. My partner and a fellow co-host, Lou Palumbo, is still on assignment and can't be with us today. What we want to do is take up where we left off in our last episode about the new reporting requirements from the legislation that's come out for LLCs to report information to their state corporation commissions or Secretary of State's office, whichever body in each state licenses corporations to include LLCs, limited liability corporations. So there's some aspects to that we want to get into. So before I switch over to Christian Briggs, I wanted to say that the National American Institute of Certified Public Accountants has petitioned the House to submit legislation to hold this up, and they cite the statistics of what this is going to cost all of the companies in the country that would be required to do this reporting, how expensive it would be for them, and to at least study it and delay it long enough to look at it. So in regard to that, a new bill has been introduced in the House to do just that. And we can ask Christian and Mandy to talk about that. So Christian, go ahead and take over that part of it.
Thank you, Thomas. So what we're going to talk about today, which we continue the evolutionary story of the central bank digital currency, the FEDNow launch, which is obviously the migration and the platform that commercial banks are putting their accounts into the FEDNow for clearing, both different versions of why that is going to be needed and why it's being done, which we'll talk to deeper into the show. And the third part is, what is the Corporate Transparency Act all about? Why is there additional requirements that would usurp or layer in the state's role for understanding entities, registration, who's who in the zoo, as they say, within the companies or whatever entity is being launched? And why would you, even if that is something that it helps prevent money laundering or terrorist movement of cash and all the different variables that they use and adjectives and so forth. But why is it being uploaded when you have 85, 90, 95% of the world's, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say the world's, but well, it is kind of the world's in the sense, but US certainly is the majority of small businesses. It's 99.9% here. So I'm going to say 85 to 90% of the world. Why would you need, let's just think about this. Why would you need all these documents that the state clearly already has at their fingertips to be uploaded into and at the Financial Crimes Division of the IRS? And these are the topics we're going to ask ourselves today. And we're going to ask ourselves, are the three parts needed and necessary in order for both the domestic and well as the global launch of the central bank digital currency, now of late being called a centralized digital token or a stable coin in some regards. So today's show, we're going to break it down. And one of the things I want to start off with is very clearly something that's alarming. So documents that we've been able to actually attain, which are white papers, some of them are internal documents that are shared among the development teams or the management or certainly governments around the world, nations of which that want to have a central bank digital currency or some form of digital monetary payment, but utilize it in such a way that would eliminate the need for paper currency. Now, anybody you talk to will tell you that Venmo, Cash App, other forms of digital transferring of value, we can call it money, we can call it dollars, we can call it yens, pounds, euros, whatever you want to call it. It's a digital token. Tokenized means it's authenticated between a point A and a point B. It's peer-to-peer transactional in its purest form. Blockchain, which clearly records who had it, where it went, and it has a never-ending record of the fulfillment or use of the token, wherever their token or the token comes from, whatever country or whoever nation issues it. So as people realize that we're going to shift from a decentralized system to a centralized, which means we go from an autonomous private network where no borders exist in a decentralized, where a centralized then becomes a central focal point of a central government to enable the government to be able to control, to monitor, surveil, and ultimately contain the money of any and all of their citizens, certainly within the borders of this nation or this country. So today, what we're going to do is connect the dots. Well, the first dot that I want to bring out, and our esteemed guest, Mandy Gunasekara, will also break down a lot of this, is going to be why and where could they have possibly funded this. So let's take the first step. We have documents that can go back all the way to March of 2018, where the World Economic Forum was detailing the global building, launch, and understanding of what would be forthcoming with a central bank digital currency. We have more documents that clearly show that not only did the World Economic Forum, the Bank of International Settlements, and Ripple, which is the XRP token, are clearly now building this, and they are advanced this thing so heavily. Now, the second part, the FEDNow launch. FEDNow, which is exactly what it says, it's doing business with the Federal Reserve Bank in a now proposition, now defined as seamless clearing integration for commercial banks of any size to be able to offer services that they may not otherwise have or not have in the efficient manner that they would like to have. And we have said this before, Mandy knows this, Thomas, you know this, we've said this before, but I'm going to make it clear here in case some of the listeners aren't aware. I had the pleasure of being with one of the highest ranking members of the United States Congress, and we met with a gentleman from the American Bankers Association who said, this is a direct competition platform, the FEDNow against commercial banks. In that meeting, he also said that the FEDNow will have the account number and all transactional history. The third part of this three-part leg is now the Corporate Transparency Act, which gives the government all the needed and necessary tools at their fingertips to be able to upload information, as we said earlier. So when you connect the dots, a Skunk Works domestic and CBDC build, a FEDNow that migrates the commercial accounts, which is 99.9% of all business or small business that have commercial accounts. And the third part is the opportunity for the federal government to have at their fingertips at the Financial Crimes Division of the IRS all the information that they clearly have and seize the property if there's any infractions. Thus, they'll know how much money you have and where it's being spent. So this is the three-part system to be able to usher in the new world order, the Great Reset, which is the resetting of wealth and distribution from the wealth inequality. Now, the biggest part is, I'm going to get right to it. How in the hell did they fund it? How would they at the Federal Reserve be able to fund all of this? Well, for that, we're going to talk to Mandy. Mandy's going to be able to share with you how they've been doing this thing for years, given the fact that even during the Trump administration, a lot of this was built. The original March 18 Bank of International Settlements document, which was clearly given to the WEF, clearly shows how they're doing it and what the next 5 to 10 years is going to look like. And then subsequently, there were more documents that were ushered in that we were able to get our hands on. So, Mandy, why don't you share with us all of the information that you know firsthand, not conjecture, not hypothetical or guesswork at best, that this is firsthand knowledge, examples, and current now notions of how they funded something that Congress was only the ones who could approve this, allow this, and that way at least listeners know that it is done, and here's how they did it. So, Mandy, thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to let you take a stab at this one.
Yeah, it's great to be with you and to continue this conversation because it's so extremely important and goes to fundamentals of how, generally speaking, citizens of this country can generate independence through engagement with commerce. And what the left has been trying to do is to diminish that and to, while diminish it, centralize relative control. And money is one of the things that they are very much after. As you were talking, Christian, and leading up, I just wanted to do a quick search because I didn't recall off the top of my head ever seeing an appropriation for FEDNow coming from Congress, an official recognition of taxpayer money being set aside to invest in the development, research, and whatever of FEDNow. And it's not that I follow all appropriations that closely, but generally I pay attention, and I searched really quick to see if I had just missed something, and turns out I haven't. This is from a banking policy association that monitors these very, very, very closely, and they basically said that Congress has never appropriated funds for FEDNow or reviewed the program in any way, yet taxpayer money has been spent for years. Oop, hold on, my AirPod is dying, so it may transition for a second. Can you hear me okay?
Oh yeah, we hear you fine. You're good.
Okay, great. The what they do. So how is it that the federal government has been spending money on a program that Congress has neither authorized nor designated funds to be spent? Well, what happens, and I saw this time and time again, I saw it most egregiously in the climate space, but the administrative agencies, they'll just pull funds from another organization. And what they will say, if Congress finds out, they try to do this in a very sneaky manner. Now, if you're a Republican and you try to do this, you're never going to get away with it. The example that comes to mind is when President Trump tried to use funds that were arguably fitting for use of building the wall, and he got called out in the ways that he got called out for everything, which was wall-to-wall coverage of him shifting funds in a way that offends the appropriateness and the standards of Congress. That's what Republicans have to deal with. Democrats do this all the time, and they will just shift money around. And the most egregious example I ever saw of this was in the climate space, where you had the Department of State take funds from the Terrorist Readiness Fund, and they shifted it to basically give a giant handout to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars to the Green Climate Fund, which was a funding mechanism of the Paris Climate Accord. Now, mind you, Congress never signed on to the Paris Climate Accord. Congress never approved funding of the Green Climate Fund. And actually, Congress, during the appropriations that this happened of the year that these funds were actually shifted, had zeroed out the program. And what the administrative staff and the political appointees at that time, which were all Obama appointees, argued in response was, well, Congress zeroed it out, but they didn't put an explicit limit on potentially shifting these funds over anyway. And so this is what the left does. If there's not an explicit limit, there probably isn't an explicit limit to shift funds to develop to the development of FEDNow or the growth and integration of it. And it's because Congress didn't know about it. So what the administrative agencies will say is, well, if there's no explicit prohibition, then we can probably do it anyway. Never mind, Congress wouldn't know to put out an explicit prohibition because they haven't been looped into the development of this to begin with. So that's just one example of the type of really bad actors that we're going to be dealing with that have been pushing taxpayer funds to fund this very problematic, essentially CBDC version it's about to be implemented and take hold of the economy in a very big way, as Christian pointed out.
So let's talk about that for a second. If you can usurp Congress on building it, you can usurp Congress, and you have in the past clearly shown this to be evidence on the funding of this thing. My biggest question is, and Thomas, I want you to think about this because you've seen plenty of things in the past that were money laundering or things, let's just say, that weren't kosher. This sounds to me like it's a RICO thing. I mean, I don't know what else to say. It sounds like a bunch of gangsters over there in different parts of the federal government, the federal agencies, are building something that they know is completely illegal, goes against every mention of the Constitution in both form and actual, because obviously, we have the spirit of the Constitution, what the spirit means, and then of course the details are in the devil, which they've started to realize that they don't even care that people know this because they know people are starting to get wind of it. Thomas, what do we do? In other words, how can any member of the FBI, which is giving coverage to the Biden crime syndicate, and now they're giving coverage to this system because it can't be this much of a secret? Thomas, what would we tell our listeners in a way that gives them some comfort that this could be stopped?
Well, I think the first thing to tell the listeners would be get a hold of your members of Congress, wake them up, read these bills, pay attention, because some of the passage of this stuff has been on their watch. They didn't read it, and all of a sudden, oh, gee, we had no idea this was going on. Secondly, I wanted to say FinCEN is part of the U.S. Treasury Department. It's not related directly to IRS. So the financial enforcement network of Treasury, designed to stop money laundering back in the day when drug trafficking was more obvious, let's say, the financial transactions. And what they were looking at is cash coming in through drug proceeds was pouring into the Fed in Miami, whereas the other feds around the country saw practically nothing. And so they're looking at this, wait, this is drug trafficking proceeds. How is it coming into our system? Why aren't we able to find it? Now, part of the reporting requirements under the so-called Transparency Act, which is saying, that FinCEN should receive these reports or this ownership, let's say, of corporate accounts. Now, what I don't know is what's the difference between a corporate account in the state of Virginia, where I have a corporation incorporated, and I have all the requirements that I have to provide to them since I started this 12 years ago and continue every year. That act that says LLCs and corporations will be required to have the following information filed. Well, I had all that. So the State Corporation of Virginia did not tell me, oh, you don't have enough. It's got to be in by the 1st of January. My attorney that handles this said, okay, you're in compliance. Everything's fine. But what I don't know is, what does it take to incorporate an LLC in Delaware, for example? So when we look at the 20 LLCs that are being run by the Biden family, let's say, what happens there? Is the owner of each LLC explicit in the reporting requirements? So do you have one LLC then own additional or subsidiary LLCs that don't list the owner of the company, that don't list the address, Social Security, or EIN, which is a federal tax ID number? So that's what we don't know. And right now what happens is, if there's a proceeding that FinCEN wants to get this information, or let's say the House committee doing the oversight of this investigation wants that information, then they may have to issue all these subpoenas, and the records may not be on file in the given state if that state doesn't require. So you have all these different reporting requirements. Every state has their own. So it's a way to make sure that at the minimum, that all of the basic things, which aren't necessarily tyranny, but just efficiency, that if you're going to have the owner, if you own a corporation, then the state that licenses that corporation should know who you are, where you live, and what your ID numbers are. I think that's a minimum, and it's not unreasonable.
The world is in crisis, with political unrest and financially unstable countries trying to print their way to prosperity by taking on trillions of dollars of new debt. It's incredibly concerning. That's why you need to own silver as a hedge. So call today to receive the free hard asset information kit on how easy it is to own silver. Green energy demands will possibly turbocharge silver prices to 50, 100, even 300 an ounce, according to many experts around the world. Silver is a proven hedge against inflation. Since 1971, silver has returned over 11% when averaged yearly. Silver is a proven wealth preservation for hundreds of years. Hard Asset Management is a trusted leader in precious metals and rare coins for nearly 40 years. We have the guaranteed lowest prices, fast and easy ordering, expedited shipping, with award-winning customer service available 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. CST, Monday through Friday. So protect yourself from the chaos. Invest in stability with Hard Asset Management. Call now and get your free Hard Asset Management information kit on how easy it is for you to own silver. 844-426-4653. 844-426-4653.
So let me ask you this. And Mandy, I think this is going to be great for you. Again, how many more layers of information do we have to continue to give? I mean, they can ask us for our favorite color here pretty soon, because it sounds to me like this is going from the local to the state to the Fed. And it sounds like they're amalgamating all of our information in an easy, cohesive, fast manner of which they can then attach what we used to call in the software business cookies, and they can start watching and monitoring all the entities, the movement of the assets, the movement of the cash, especially when we have a centralized digital token or a central bank digital currency get attached to our individual as humans. And next thing you know, they're watching, monitoring us, surveillance in all real time because they know where every single thing that we own or have, whether it's cash, what have you, is. And because of that, it sounds like this is becoming a police state.
Yeah, I'm happy to add in, jump in on this. I mean, I think there is an argument for the state to have access to that information. They're much closer to it. They derive a lot of relative resources. There's the certification process for a reason. So there's an argument for the state to have that, but this next layer where all this information is funneled to a centralized federal entity, where I read this yesterday. This is not my original thought, but I thought it was well said. Essentially, all of us having to report this information to FinCEN, the financial crimes component of the Department of Treasury. It's almost as if we are guilty until proven innocent. They've essentially flipped the script on what it means to start a business in this country. And now if you're starting a business in this country, the Department of Treasury assumes that you're going to be engaged in some degree of terrorist financing unless they exempt you from it. It really is a backwards way of thinking. And we talked a little bit about some of the consequences, but before I move on to all the consequences, the problem is this centralized source of information that's so comprehensive, so far-reaching, definitely an intrusion on private rights to privacy. But it's also, we've seen time and again how the federal government will abuse access to broad pools of personal information. Either they don't appropriately protect it and secure it, or they do, and it's used for corrupt purposes by those who are supposed to be guarding it and creating a safe haven around it for what we've mostly seen, political purposes, a la the Trump Russia hoax, and then the spying on the campaign, and on again. But at the end of the day, what this is going to do, it's just going to do to people who earnestly want to start a business, they're going to think twice about it. This is going to have a chilling effect, and it's going to create another barrier for entry that comes in the form of added cost and added compliance.
Yeah, so the compliance, let's talk about that. The infractions that we spoke on the part one of the show here, and we're trying to talk into, again, greater detail because it really is an alarming thing. The more we look at this thing every day, we realize that this is the final part or the portion that they need, because once they build a digital form of monetary payments, okay, we're calling it that for that now, they call it centralized digital token. Now they have the accounts on the Federal Reserve's platform. So they built the money, they built the platform in which that money can be generated and used in a centralized. And the third part was to know where all everyone's assets are, so they couldn't try to undermine what the Federal Reserve and the federal government ultimately's mission is, the globalization of digital monetary payments. And they don't want any cash or gold, or they're literally trying to know where all the assets are, so nobody can work within some context around the digital currency. I want to again talk about the penalties, because I got a call yesterday, and I got actually some calls today. Not as bad as some of the yesterday ones when they started to realize. Tell us again, Mandy, what happens if a T's not crossed and I's not dotted? It happens to your money?
Yeah, well, it's an invitation for added scrutiny by the Financial Crimes Network over at Department of Treasury. And if you didn't appropriately report or completely report or willingly provide false information, which, yes, is a crime, but the former two, you're subject to anywhere from $10,000 to $250,000 in fines, and you're subject from anywhere from 3 to 10 years in prison. So it's not only taking control and seizing of your assets, it's taking control of and potentially seizing your freedom for a certain amount of time.
Okay, so if they can't get you to adhere to these overburdened and really insufferable, which is a compliance requirement, they'll just it's a tax, right? Fines are taxes. Let's just call it for what it is. Anytime a government seizes money, it's either a tax, or sometimes they call it forfeiture. Okay, fine, whatever. Either way you're taking it. I just wonder how much of the small businesses are going to be able to have the understanding and the financial wherewithal to comply. And if they don't, then the Great Reset, which is the wealth inequality redistribution from the have and the have-nots, and a lot of times the have-nots don't have much to give, but they take it anyway. This sounds to me like it's going to put people in a position of failure. Like this is set up for failure. We've seen, I'll talk about Obamacare. Mandy, I want to get your take on this. Let's talk about the Affordable Care Act. We all know that this is coming to a head and it's probably going to collapse. That was set up for failure. I think Obama's original needs or wants were to create a socialized medicine program that would socialize all medicine, very much like what Canada and the UK have in other parts of the world, which is an inferior form of mediocre healthcare. Now, it gives you 100% coverage, but it diminishes the value of the treatment or the medical treatment or the care by 50 to 70%. I was talking to one of a medical doctor yesterday, certainly a high-ranking member of Congress, and I asked him, with Obamacare, we went from a doctor seeing their patients, let's say 8 out of the 12 hours a day, to paperwork being 8 hours of the 12 hours and 4 hours of patient care or patient quality seeing. So to me, this Corporate Transparency Act is already a setting up small to medium businesses for failure. You know the ACA. You've studied it. You've been around with how bad it is. Would you see this need to be set up for failure to make companies comply in such a way that either becomes a cost burden or they just systematically say, the hell with my business, I'm just going to go work for somebody else and let them be responsible for all this compliance? Does it sound familiar with like ACA and the doctors and the medical industry?
Yeah, it also sounds familiar for anyone who may have read Atlas Shrugged, where
Yeah.
Like as you were talking, I was like, oh, this is I've heard this plot before.
Right.
But yeah, no, I mean, it is the Affordable Care Act, and admittedly, I've avoided healthcare policy the majority of my public policy career, but I have been a recipient of healthcare on Obamacare when I worked for the federal government and then off of Obamacare. And you're right, it's set up to fail because what do they want? They want a single payer system. So they couldn't quite get a single payer system. And so they set up this pseudo system with all this compliance where now anyone who goes to the doctor's office knows you're even when the doctor's in the room with you, they're not talking to you that much. They're looking at they're filling out forms, they're filling out information, they're checking boxes that someone in Washington, D.C. told them that they had to check for liability reasons. So really the bureaucrat and the trial lawyer has overtaken the patient-doctor relationship. And we all suffer from that. We suffer from that, and we get coverage, but not the best care. And at the end of the day, what it also does is it quashes innovation. And I think that is the segue to what's going on right now. They want to quash innovation because they don't want any competitors to come out of what they're trying to do with the central bank digital currency and trying to centralize all this information, whether it's financial information or other information. And this is one of the reasons too, you've seen the Biden administration and those who really are all for this great reset, they've been so critical of Bitcoin in particular, because that is a competitor to the CBDC. It's outside the centralized control. So you see a lot of the efforts aimed at undermining the value in the network, and the use of Bitcoin is a reflection of this attempt to quash innovation and to deter the growth of anything that could potentially challenge the centralized authority that is being created through the CBDC. And just to connect the dots one more time, like Christian said, you have the Corporate Transparency Act. This isn't the only mechanism Congress has, but another that Congress has created and now the federal administration has. It's one mechanism whereby if you trip up, federal government has additional scrutiny to look at all of your funding and then potentially take over and seize that. And it's going to be a lot harder to ultimately get it back. So it's just one more tool the federal government has to seize private property and to take away independence and power and innovation, which is what's necessary to really keep centralized forces in check.
Okay, Thomas, get your take on this thing. Okay, you've been around long enough. You have been one of the highest ranking members of the FBI as well as Interpol. So this sounds to me like an organized crime from manufacturing to distribution to retail. Sounds to me like this is the connecting of the dots. What's your thoughts on it?
Well, I wanted to ask Mandy the status of a bill introduced in the House by Representative Patrick McHenry, chair of the House Financial Services Committee in the last couple of months, HR 4035. And what the bill is asking for is a delay in the implementation and the reporting requirements of this act, and basically to give Congress a chance to study it. And the bill is heavily sponsored by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. And they've submitted studies of what they estimate this would cost the corporations around the country to comply with adding more reporting requirements if they don't already have it. And then, you know, what FinCEN resources would be required to even go through all of this material. So, you know, that was just introduced within the last few months. So Mandy, do you know the status of that HR 4035?
Yeah, so I just looked it up as you were talking. So it's been introduced in both the House, and there is a Senate companion that is S2623. It's called the Protecting Small Business Information Act of 2023, and it has been referred to the committees in the House. It was referred to the House Committee on Financial Services, which is interesting because later this week, I think it's this week. Is this right, Christian? It's this Thursday, I believe, that some of the SEC commissioners are coming before the Financial Services Committee, and they're going to be talking about a multitude of issues, but they're going to be talking about CBDCs and the growth of the surveillance state as it is in the financial space versus elsewhere. So anyway, it's been submitted to committee. For anyone who wants a quick refresher on how a bill becomes a law, it goes through committee. They will have to have a markup that will have to be scheduled if it follows regular order, which typically you do in the House. It'll be marked up. If it's voted on and passes at the committee, it is then sent to the floor. And then it's the consideration of when and how, and if there's amendments, will be determined by the Rules Committee. And then it could be considered for a floor vote in the House. And then it would be sent over to the Senate. Unless there was some parallel action in the Senate, then you'd have to start that process all over in the Senate as well. But that's where it is right now.
Another question I have on this whole thing is that, is the reporting in any way required to go directly to FinCEN, or is each state corporation commission or Secretary of State's office, whichever entity within each of the 50 states licenses LLCs and regular corporations, is that where this reporting is to go to? And then, of course, then it's uniformly available to FinCEN if they're doing an investigation. So just as a practical example right now, you know, Representative Comer has said the Biden family utilized 20 LLCs to receive money from overseas and then route it through the different LLCs, basically, you know, your standard money laundering type operation. So under this new legislation, does that mean that each of those LLCs has to identify who its owner is, identification, residence information, tax information of each owner of each corporation? And if so, is that going to the states into their databases and not directly to FinCEN? And knowing over the years how FinCEN, you know, is so dramatically understaffed, underfunded, I don't know where they would all of a sudden be in a situation to receive hundreds of thousands of forms coming in from every LLC in the country. So what is the implementation of the reporting requirements?
So I think they're still working that out. There's supposed to be 3 final rules proposed and then finalized rules that FinCEN / the Department of Treasury is supposed to do before this actually takes effect. As I see, I think they've done 2 to date. And as I've read it, at least from the legislative language, which is only a piece of it, this information will be sent to FinCEN, where it'll be held in a quote safe and secure location. So it's supposed to all ultimately go there. But you bring up a good point, Tom. There's certainly resources. So I'm sure this has already come with added resource requests with the Department of Treasury. And that's something else for people to think. Do we really want the Department of Treasury to be getting additional, I'm sure it's to the tune of hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars, to build out this FinCEN network alongside remember, the IRS is still trying to get those 87,000 agents. So it's just this surveillance state is being created across the board to totally monitor and track everything that American citizens do. Now, you bring up a good point with the Biden crime family network that Congressman Comer has exposed, and now the subject of an impeachment inquiry that we just saw that they announced today that they will in fact be doing, which is really great. But here's the other problem. NARA, let's use the documents discussion as an example. The National Archives, they are a centralized source of all presidential executive information. They have Biden documents and they have Trump documents. Now, because they're the centralized force, they've been able to apply a different standard of what they're willing to release when it comes to requests that could harm Trump versus what they're willing to release when it comes to documents that could harm the Biden family. So again, you have a centralized entity that has been corrupted by political ideology by those that are actually in charge. And you can guarantee that FinCEN, one way or another, would likely be corrupted by these same forces, where maybe they would have better information to the total organization of the various entities that the Biden crime family has pulled together to try and protect Joe Biden from being directly tied to money from foreign people and foreign heads of state and whatnot. But do we think that they would actually share it in the same way that they may share it if it was something that could potentially undermine Trump? It's an unfortunate question, but it's a reality of the world that we live in. Anytime you have this centralized collection of personal information. So again, it's one of these consequences that we have to think through when it comes to creating this degree of power, and how we know that the bureaucracies, one way or another, will be corrupted by their own self-interest, which tends to benefit the left at the expense of the right.
Right, and the bureaucracy is going to require funding. So if suddenly the Department of Treasury or FinCEN is going to receive hundreds of thousands of files for each LLC and corporation in the country, that's going to have to be funded by Congress, and the House controls the funding. So if the House doesn't grant them millions of dollars so that they can now receive, process, store, and distribute the necessary information, what's it going to result in? They're not going to be able to do this on any kind of scale to hurt corporations or LLCs if they're not funded to do it. And I think that all of a sudden this bill, as we've talked about now, has been snuck through, and most congressmen didn't realize it was going through, and it was scattered through other different parts of the bill, and everybody was tricked. Suddenly it's passed, and all these reporting requirements are put in effect. Well, it's one thing to say you have to report. It's another thing to say to 300,000 corporations in the United States, guess what you have to do from now on? And in supporting HR 4035, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants put a study in of how much this will cost all of the companies in America, how much effort, financial and otherwise, is going to be required to comply if this law isn't at least held in abeyance until it's further studied and they figure out how it's going to actually work. So it's not a done deal yet, even though they passed it, because implementing it's going to be another issue.
Hard Asset Management is a trusted leader in precious metals and rare coins for nearly 40 years. We have the guaranteed lowest prices, fast and easy ordering, expedited shipping, with award-winning customer service available 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. CST, Monday through Friday. So protect yourself from the chaos. Invest in stability with Hard Asset Management. Call now and get your free Hard Asset Management information kit on how easy it is for you to own silver. 844-426-4653. 844-426-4653.
Oh, it's going to be a huge issue, but make certain that this piece of legislation, in part or as it stands, more than likely will have some go through. There'll be some watering down, Thomas. I agree with you. I think Mandy probably would concur. And I do anticipate a government shutdown at the end of the month. I don't think the two sides are going to be able to come to a full agreement. I would hope that this one thing we're talking today, which is really one of three parts, could somehow be used as leverage to be eliminated when the negotiations start. But I think for all intents and purposes, we would kind of expect a government shutdown which would be very horrific for the economy. I'm sure Yellen will find means and ways to continue to pay some of the government services, because remember, there's still government cash flow. It doesn't have to always be a doom and gloom thing. But I was hoping in some way, shape, or form that Congress would leverage the Republican side, the incredible overreach and the declaration on privacy that this bill and now legislation clearly shows is upon us. One of the other things that we need to kind of address is, let's say this thing stands. Let's just say it stands as is. I don't even know how to estimate the cost of the small businesses. It's such a horrific piece of shit. Can we say shit? We can say shit, right? This is like FCC guidance or something, because it really is a piece of shit, piece of legislation. I don't think anyone disagree with that. But I will say that in its current form, it's got to be a staggering cost. Mandy, do you have any idea, or Thomas, anybody? Because I don't. I've tried to think through my head how much it could cost. I'm going to say $10,000, $15,000 a year. Now, when the average small business is doing about $600,000-700,000 in sales and making about $100,000, $125,000 before taxes, $10,000 or $15,000, it's got to be at least that much, because the compliance alone is so egregious and the penalties are so horrific that it's almost like no one's going to step out of line. Sounds to me like more government control and then government seizure on top of regulatory burdensome monetary wise. I don't even know. So Mandy or Tom, do you want to speak to that and then kind of try to close it at what we think that it could cost and what the ultimate consequences are going to be?
I just lost track of, looking at the supporting letters that the Institute of Certified Public Accountants has submitted. They've done all of these studies financially, the impact on the different size companies, how much it's going to cost them, what the requirements are going to include. And, these are things that no one's considered up till now. Now, at some point politically, at what level does this impact the donor class? If it's just, going against small companies like mine, the administration could care less. I'm sure Biden, there isn't anybody in that administration that's going to be sympathetic to poor little old me. But if the donor class in this are huge corporations and it's going to cost them tens of thousands of man hours for their accountants and people in the company to put together additional reporting requirements based on this, well, that may have an impact with the election coming up on what's going to happen and who they're going to support. So I think that the political aspect of this is not yet realized, is what I'm saying. When they sneak a bill through, okay, no harm, no foul. But all of a sudden, when organizations like the accountants of the country come in and say, wait a minute, we're looking at what this is going to cost each of our members. Have you guys thought about this? And members of Congress are going, of course not. So now they're going to have to start thinking about it. And with this funding, with the government shutting down at the end of September and all of that, now you're looking at funding that the House has to start the approval of for the 85,000 IRS agents that they want to hire, for the tens of thousands of people, whatever they're going to have to add to FinCEN and other organizations. And then the states are going to say, wait a minute, our corporation approving bodies in our states are going to need money to process all this. Now in Virginia, it costs $50 a year to re-register your LLC. Now, suddenly, all of these massive changes in reporting requirements were to go in, it would impact them. Now, what are they going to do? Charge $200, $2,000? What are they going to charge each LLC when they, reapply for next year's licensing? So I think that the implications of who's going to be impacted and what their political power is yet to be determined, I think. And it may end up derailing 99% of this.
Mandy, your take on it as well?
Yeah, I agree with what Tom said. And I would just say this, I found this while he was talking. So FinCEN estimated that the cost of compliance for all 32 million reporting companies is their estimation to be $21.7 billion for initial reports and $1 billion for updated reports. And then it goes on to estimate that it will take as little as 90 minutes or as much as almost 11 hours to complete and submit paperwork to the registry that they are now creating. So at the end of the day, this is billions of dollars of added costs that companies are not spending on their company or their people, or the derivative impacts that can create in either a small or a large community. This is money being sucked out of the economy that desperately needs money to be invested in it right now, and it's being sent to a bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., where, yeah, there's a handful of good public civil servants, but I have no doubt in my mind that this information, it will be mishandled and it will be abused. And so it is a giant waste in the sense that we often see when it comes to over-regulation. It is a suck on the economy. It is a boon for Washington, D.C., or for the federal agencies that make the people there wealthy and feel extremely relevant, while harming the rest of the Americans, especially those that are starting or want to continue small to medium-sized businesses that historically have been the economic drivers of this country, and we really need them to turn on right now. But this administration is, again and again, time and again, adding more restrictions, more requirements, and oppressing the productivity that we so desperately need.
And most of these businesses, they were the most severely impacted by the COVID shutdowns. How many small businesses never came back after being shut down? And that's still ongoing. So for me, just from a political standpoint, it's hard for me to believe how the Democratic Party is going to want to sustain the political damage that will come in the next year, an election year, with all of this going on, with all of this additional bureaucracy being created. It plays right into the hands of the Republican candidates, going against this.
Yeah, well, knowing them, they'll just blame Republicans. And in the case of the CTA, there's a lot of Republicans that voted for it that had no idea. So if they need an additional motivation to actually do something about it in this forthcoming government funding fight, there's the motivation. Your name, whether you realize it or not, is in the voter record supporting this program that's going to be so damaging and is otherwise counter to what Republican leaders, Republican officials, and certainly the candidates seeking the office of presidency are out there saying.
Right, which makes Republican candidates vulnerable to being primaried in the next 12 months, even before we get to, the election next November or a year from November. So I think that, the House members that didn't realize what this meant are now going to start realizing what it meant, and they're going to be trying to figure a way to undo the damage, especially even the personal political damage it'll do to them for having signed it.
And speaking to that political climate that we find ourselves in, I wanted to do just one quick closing segment and get some comments from Mandy and then Tom, who can close us out for this show, about McCarthy looking into an impeachment inquiry now under heavy pressure from both sides to Biden.
Yeah, I mean, thank goodness. What more evidence do we and the general public actually need to justify an impeachment of Biden and the crime syndicate that is his family? The more and more we learn about it. I will say this: it's taken a long time to get to where we are right now, but I do think that is good and reflective of the very careful, strategic approach that Congressman Comer has taken, because he understands what the rest of us understand, whether consciously or subconsciously. If we mess up one tiny insignificant detail during this impeachment inquiry, that is going to overtake wall-to-wall coverage by the media that is basically a cheerleader and a puppet of the left, and certainly has gone out of its way to protect President Biden and along every step of the way. They will try to undermine the credibility of this impeachment before it ever gets off. So the Republicans have had to take a longer time, and Comer has had to take a longer time to get to where we are today, because they really have to dot every I and cross every T, because it will be scrutinized. Whereas, just the level set, the left, what did they do? Adam Schiff gets to go on national TV and talk about how he's seen the evidence, and then, come to find out 2+ years later, there was no actual evidence, yet the media took that and ran with it, resulting in not one, but 2 impeachment trials of former President Trump. So there's a double standard here. I know Republicans have diligently been working on this. They've been strategically crafting how they are going to expose the corruption brick by brick to the American people. And I'm glad that they are finally getting started.
Yeah, I agree with Mandy completely on that. And I think up till now, McCarthy has been saying that he's not sure he can even get the impeachment articles passed in the House, that he is such a thin majority of members that it would only take a couple of Republican defectors or rhinos to say, no, we're not going to sign off on this. And then it would fall flat on his face. I think what's happened now to change all that is within the past week, we have Congressman Matt Gaetz from Florida saying, McCarthy, you better pull the trigger or we're removing you. That was part of the negotiation when they were selecting the Speaker of the House, that McCarthy accepted the fact that he had a very, very slim majority selecting him as Speaker of the House, and that thin group that was on his heels from the beginning have told him, if you don't do this right, we're coming after you and we're going to remove you as Speaker of the House. And I think McCarthy knows they could. And suddenly McCarthy has found religion and decided, okay, we're going ahead with the impeachment.
He found religion. Yeah, you're right, Thomas. He found religion because he was about to get kicked out of Speaker.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mandy, anything else to finalize this thing with? Because it's a lot to digest for our listeners. And I know that, but that's what the show's all about. It's to bring awareness. So with that said, Mandy, want to do our closing comments?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that I certainly think there will be more conversations to be had around impeachment as that carries forward. There will be lots of elements that we'll want to dig in and discuss a little bit deeper. But this is a little snippet of the importance of elections, the importance of having a majority in the House. Otherwise, we would know nothing. We would have never seen any of the oversight done by Comer. We wouldn't even be at this point where he's finally seeking or initiating an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden. And the only other thing I would add on that is they should go ahead and add Merrick Garland and Secretary Mayorkas to that list as well, because they've been an absolute dereliction of duty from day one, and they've lied repeatedly to Congress. And what the American people, all they want is accountability for the people who are causing so much harm across this country, and they should be on that list as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right.
I agree with that 100%.
Not just Joe Biden, Attorney General Garland, he has to go. Mayorkas, he has to go. When Garland goes, take Christopher Wray with you. They have to go. And we need this change desperately. And so now it's a question of strategy on the part of the Republicans. Where do they start? There's so many people in the administration that need to go. Who do they take out first, or who do they go after first? And obviously the president, and then they're weighing in on, if they take out Joe Biden right now, then we have Kamala Harris as president. And I think a lot of Dems and Republicans are going, OMG, we can't have that. So there's a lot of ramifications to what they decide and how quickly they decide it in the upcoming months.
And I think that'll close us out for this show. Great show, guys. Thanks again, Mandy and Christian, for making time for us. Such great commentary always.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Hey, we love being here. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Wherever you find us, Operation Truth Official, YouTube, you can find us on Rumble, wherever you get your audio podcast. Drop us an email with your comments and questions at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. We will be back next Tuesday and Thursday as always. See you till then.